Not logged. I'm assuming it's not logged. No, it isn't. Okay, thank you for everyone who is here. And I see that we do have people joining us from different time zones. I'm assuming based on names. Thank you for everyone who's here. And for those who are attending this, for whom this is the first webinar that they're attending, welcome and thank you for coming. I'm Dr. Amna Ijaz, an adjunct faculty at the School of Science and Engineering at Lahore University of Management Sciences in Pakistan. And this webinar that Dr. Kimiko Barrett would be giving to us today is a part of a whole series called Conversations with Women in Science and Technology, where we're trying to bring exemplary female scientists that students can interact with and learn from. So Dr. Barrett here is a wildfire research and policy lead at Headwaters Economics, which is a research organization in Bozeman, Montana in the United States. And she will speak to us about effectively communicating scientific research to policy and decision makers. And that would be especially in the context of her research, which is on wildfires. So before I begin, I will give a brief, I have tried to make her introduction super brief. It's not very brief even then. And then I'll move on to and I'll just give the floor to Rojah Sheikh. So before we begin, we have Dr. Barrett, and other than being a research and policy lead at Headwaters Economics, she is also the program director for community planning assistance for wildfires. Through that program, she is working with more than 80 communities across the United States to generate community-driven solutions to reduce wildfire risk and increase community resilience. And she partners with institutions, community leaders, local governments, and other subject matter experts to lead research on topical issues. And those include, and are not limited to, true cost of wildfires, constructing wildfire-resistant homes, land use planning, and measuring wildfire impacts through structural loss. So Dr. Barrett has a lot of experience in community and of working with the governance that she has very graciously agreed to share with us. Thank you so much. Again, it's super early where she is speaking to us from. And then we have Rojah Sheikh, who is a senior doing BSc Honors in Anthropology and Sociology at LUMS, which, to repeat, is Lahore University of Management Sciences. She is an aspiring policymaker, particularly environmental policy, and she is especially curious to know how scientists can bridge the gap between science and policy, which is why she volunteered to moderate this session. So thank you, Rojah and Dr. Barrett. And with that, I'll hand the floor to Dr. Barrett. And from Rojah, when she finishes her talk, it would be all you. Thank you.
All right. So let me make sure everybody can see my screen here. Give me 1 second while I navigate this. Can I get a thumbs up? Rojah, are you seeing my screen? Fantastic. All right.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, give me 1 second here while I pull up my notes. So I got that too. Great. Okay. Minimize. Oh, there are so many windows when you do these virtual webinars. Okay, fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and get started then. So thank you so much for this incredible opportunity, for staying up late on your evening to listen to this presentation. There's a pretty significant time gap, and so it is actually now 8:30 in the morning here, Tuesday in Montana, where I live and reside. I do have to laugh, Dr. Amna. It's not early for me because I'm a mother. So I have actually been up since 5 o'clock this morning. And I'll talk a little bit more about that experience as a female in research and what that means for multiple roles. But again, I just wanted to say thank you so much for giving me this invitation. I always love to be able to talk to faculty and students about the research and doing anything within the STEM related areas, but to be able to do it to a group of women who are literally on the other side of the world is a great honor and very humbling. So I appreciate your time. So my name is Kimiko Barrett. As Dr. Amna said, I am a wildfire researcher and a policy analyst with a think tank based in the Western United States. I'll talk a little bit more about who and what I do here in a minute, but with this presentation, I want to do two things. One is to talk a little bit about the insights and the lessons I've learned, both professionally and personally, in my advancement through the STEM-related work. And then secondly, drawing from these insights, talk about communications and thinking through that process of communications in order to get very technical scientific information out the door for and into the hands of decision makers who can do something really important and valuable with that work. Because I don't know about you, but in the many, many years that I was at the institution of university learning and higher education, never once did I take a basic communications course. And in fact, in many ways, learning how to speak with who is considered the general public is discouraged at the university level because you are constantly pressured to author papers, present, and defend yourself to academic peers. We are taught how to write, converse, and engage with equals in a common language, but in a language that unfortunately very few people outside the sciences understand and honestly don't have time for. So not only is this about effectively communicating scientific research, it's really how to talk so that people listen to you. Because we live in an era where we are constantly bombarded with news, information, data, and reports. So at the same time, and unsurprisingly, our abilities to not only stay focused on what is being told to us is diminishing, but also the ability to recall what was even said. We don't honestly have time for science anymore. And so while the goldfish loses concentration after 9 seconds, that's still unfortunately 1 second longer than the average person. So not only is it important to learn how to talk about your research in a really relevant way, but it's how to do it in a way that people remember what you have said. So my question for all of you is this: if your goal is to try and get your research out to make the change and impact in the world that you want to see, how are you going to do it if the world doesn't understand what you're saying? All of this is to say that effective communications are strategic communications. And by asking the right questions ahead of time, like who, what, how, and from, you too can also be more effective in getting your message out to the right audience who can make the change that you want to see. So that's kind of it at a nutshell, but let's step back for a moment. Who am I and why do you even care what I have to say? What is my personal journey in the STEM-related fields and how does that apply to any of your perspective on this? So I think in order to better understand who I am in my career in the STEM-related area is to first understand who I am outside of my career. I am a mother. I am a loving daughter and a supporting spouse, a sister, an athlete, and a pandemic peer. I am also a perpetual student and a scholar, a self-driven and at times obstinate achiever. I am also a minority Asian American woman, born and raised in rural America, where 96% of the population of the community I live in is white. These are the foundational roles that have shaped my decisions and the lens with which I perceive the world in both my career and in life. And at the same time, it is through this context of being a minority woman in the STEM work that I have gained a great sense of empowerment and the opportunity to distinguish my voice within the crowd. Because at the same time that I am all of these maternal roles, I am also a researcher, an author, a policy analyst, a wildfire expert, an academic, and a community practitioner. I give presentations, congressional testimony, interviews, and publish on the need to use science to inform and improve long-term community resilience, specifically with respect to climate change and wildfires. So in other words, my job is to try and effectively persuade decision makers that climate change is real and that it's happening, that we have the science and the research to do something about it now. And by not acting now, we are sacrificing and jeopardizing the health and resilience of generations to come. Thinking through the communications of that and messaging of how I make that argument to different individuals and groups of people is in part why I'm successful. Because that I've learned that with time, while I may be the minority woman in the room, the voice that I carry and the impact I have does not have to be quieted by the majority. It is in your singularity as a woman in the STEM-related work that you have the strength and confidence to make your message heard and your presence visible. Because, make no doubt about it, we as women in the STEM fields are underrepresented, but in that we are unique. We are educated women interacting and advancing in a world of science predominantly led by men. 98% of the people I engage with and interact on a daily basis are men. And while women in the workforce have made great strides in STEM work in the recent decades, we continue to be massively underrepresented, particularly in 4 of the 6 STEM research areas, including math, physical sciences, engineering, and computer sciences. This division of labor is similarly reflected in how our employment is paid, and that we will earn 20% less than our male counterparts. Yet even more demonstrative is that even as a woman gains her position in a STEM-related field, there's a 40% likelihood that she will quit or go to half-time once her first child is born. Why is that? Well, it's because we are rarely just women in STEM-related work. We are constantly balancing multiple roles as caregivers, as nurturing spouses, and as household administrators, all of which, of course, has been exacerbated by COVID. But the balancing of multiple roles for women in this field and in sciences, as a scientist, as a researcher, as a mom, as a caregiver, can also enhance your situational awareness and level of empathy in surprising ways. You are given at any singular time the ability to balance between multiple roles and talk to different audience based on who it is they are and what they need to hear. These are the foundations for basic communication strategies in all walks of life, whether in your life or in your career. So let us take a moment to re-envision STEM, not just as a science-based field and discipline, but in the strength that it brings to women in this area. It brings that strength and that power, the tenacity, the determination, the perseverance to succeed. It brings empathy and love, and we are motivated to make our voices heard. And I noted in the previous slide, I am a minority Asian American woman living in rural America. So let me tell you a little bit about what that's like. I live here in Montana. It's where I was born and raised, particularly in the southwest corner. As I stated earlier, it's 96% white. It's famously known as the home to Yellowstone National Park. It's beautiful. It has lots of mountains, not too dissimilar than where you live in Pakistan. It's also known for cowboys. It has a historical culture of Native Americans. It is a state increasingly notorious for being socioeconomically divided, where the opulence of the wealth juxtaposes the reality and starkness of poverty in the working class. As I noted, it's homogeneously white with pockets of racial diversity around the university and on the Native American reservations. This is where I was born and raised and where I currently live. I did have the opportunity to travel fairly extensively during college, though, with great support from my parents. And I continued my education through Montana State University, ultimately getting my doctoral work done in an area very close to you through the Department of Forestry and Sciences at the University of Montana. So my husband and I did dissertation work in Ladakh, so just globally east of you guys. And we were up there for 4 years doing research with communities and studying climate change impacts, water scarcity issues, geopolitical challenges, and other socioeconomic trends within that region. And this is where I did my dissertation work. And it was through this very formative learning experience that I very quickly realized that if I wanted to make the impact I wanted with my research, I needed to do it, one, in a place where I spoke the language, two, where I had some serious credibility and justification for wanting that change. I wasn't particularly a foreigner coming in from an outside land. And three, I had a long-term investment and well-being knowledge of the area and understanding of what the place was that I was working in. So I pursued a think tank called Headwaters Economics. It was a policy nonpartisan research group based in Bozeman. It was a group I had long admired for many, many years before I approached them for work. And graciously, fortuitously, they were looking for somebody to lead their wildfire efforts in. And much of it was due to this man here who became a great mentor of mine and was the executive director of Headwaters for so long, Dr. Ray Rasker. So on the very first day I went into his office, he sat down and he showed me this poster, this placard on his back wall, which was a picture of a mythical story of David and Goliath. And he said, learn this story well, Kimmy, because this is how we do much of our work at Headwaters Economics. It's all about strategy. We are scientific translators. We work with academics to take that message and give it to policymakers. And it's all about strategy. And so I said, what does this have to do with David and Goliath? And he said, well, David overcame great obstacles by using strategy. By using a stone, throwing it at the right place at the right time, he killed Goliath and he overcame his obstacle. And this is a similar approach that we can use with our communications and how we do all of our research, not just in Headwaters Economics, but with science at large. So asking these key questions very early on in your research development. Who are you making this research for? What needs to happen to make it actually materialize? Then once you have that research product, what is the story that you need to share to actually convey the importance of that research? Who should share, who needs to be your messenger? Is it going to be you, or is it somebody else that you work with? Is it a local partner? Is it somebody else with street credibility that can convey that message more effectively than you can? And then how do you need to tell that story? So over time, I have since distilled these 5 key strategies into something a little bit cleaner. First and foremost, who are you talking to with communications and research? When you're trying to get your science very, very technical, knowing that you've never taken a communications course, who is it that you are trying to speak to? Because who you speak to will influence and greatly determine what it is you need to say. Very often with science, you don't need to tell everything. Pick and tease out one key nugget of information, of knowledge that can really convince that one person what it is you're saying is important. Who needs to say it? As I said earlier, who is your messenger? Sometimes it's going to be you, but very often it's somebody else that needs to tell your story. And then how do they need to hear it? In an era of multimedia platforms, pick which platform or which outlet is going to deliver your message. Is it social media? Is it a presentation like this? Is it going to be a peer-reviewed article? What is that medium for which you are actually delivering your message? That's also very important. So let's think this through with my work and how I do this on a day-to-day basis with wildfire research. So I know Pakistan is not prevalently known for wildfires, but here in the Western United States, it is a dominant risk and threat that is increasing due to changing climate change or climate risks. So my job, more or less, as I said earlier, is to try and effectively persuade decision makers that these risks are real, that they're increasing, that we have the science and the research to do something about it, and that we need to act now. So I, more or less, in my role, take all of the scientific information out there about wildfire research and I repackage it for different types of audiences, all very dependent on who it is I'm talking to. So I'm going to talk you through an actual example of how I've done this with the city of Austin, Texas. So Texas is the largest state in America. Within it is the city of Austin, which is the fastest growing metropolitan area in the United States, with over 61% of its houses located in high wildfire risk areas. So more or less what that is indicating in the next 10 years is that those homes are going to experience or be exposed to a wildfire. They also have a long history of racial segregation that's more or less baked into how that city has grown and developed over time. So the city approached us and said, hey, we need to do something about this. What we ultimately are trying for is to adopt a policy requiring homes that are built in these high-risk areas meet certain standards so that they can survive a wildfire and thus reduce risk to the larger community. So we worked with them for many, many years to think this strategy through. But first and foremost, before we even go anywhere, I always ask the question with our partners and our audience, who is it that we are trying to convince that they need to adopt this policy? Who is that one person? It's not the general public. There is no such thing. You're always talking to somebody. You're talking to a farmer. You're talking to a rancher. You're talking to a mother or a teacher. Sometimes it's an elected official or a local city staff, a department agency lead. In our case, we were talking to an assortment of folks. And within that, we identified 3 very specific groups of people we were speaking to. It was the policymaker, the industry leader, or the construction leads behind some of this home development. And then it was the local businesses that felt that they were going to be impacted by some of these resistant measures being put in place. So by focusing on these 3 specific groups, we started to tailor our messaging towards these groups. It's kind of like a marketing campaign. It's not too distant than what a lot of commercials do when they start to push some of their products out. So you first identify who you're talking to, then what are you saying to those people? What are their primary concerns? What do they need to hear to be convinced? So policymakers are constantly wondering about capacity and budget. Industry leaders are going to want to know, what is it going to cost, and is this a predictable market? The local businesses want to know if they can grow alongside these increasing restrictions. Homeowners always are wondering about their private property values and rights. And then federal land management agencies, who are very, very dominant players here in the Western United States, want to know about policy implications. So within those 3 groups we identified, we picked out the messaging that they needed to hear in order to actually be convinced that this is a good idea. So we told them, decision makers, This will save lives. By investing now in these building restrictions and requiring homes be built to higher wildfire resistant standards, you are ensuring long-term livelihood and community resilience. For the business leaders, we told them that the costs are negotiable, that it's not actually going to do that much, increase the cost that much. And we did research to validate that and to substantiate our findings. We also told them that whatever costs are there is worth it for the long-term mitigation and investment return. And then for businesses, we said we can grow alongside these resilient efforts. We will grow with you. We actually worked with local tree farmers and arborists so that they started to grow the right trees and make the right supplies and markets available to homeowners to grow alongside these wildfire resistant measures. So by doing this very collaboratively, very strategically early on, we worked with the right audiences and we told them what they needed to hear in order to be convinced that this was a right policy change. How do they need to hear it? We did everything. We did social media, we did YouTube videos, we did interactive tools online, we did new graphics, we did a website, we gave presentations, and we gave actual peer-reviewed publications as well. So we released our whole quiver of tools and deliverable resources in order to persuade these audiences that this is the right messaging that they needed to hear. Who needs to say it? It was not us. It was not me as the academic PhD. They don't need to hear from me. They needed to hear from the local planning director, the fire chief, an elected official, another expert that wasn't me, or a community partner. They needed to pick that one person that they actually trusted and had honest relationships with in order to know that this was valid, this was real, and that they were invested in that long-term health and benefit of the community developing over time alongside increasing wildfire risk. So the fire chief and the community partner are ultimately the ones we worked with very closely delivering this message. My job, therefore, was to actually equip them with all the information and the resources they needed so that they could actually represent us in this argument, but more or less have the conviction and the faith to know that what they were saying was right and that they had passion behind it and they felt as strongly as we did that this was the right direction to go, that they had some legitimacy and local buy-in in that process early on. And ultimately, we succeeded. In March of 2021, the state of Austin, or the city of Austin, adopted a new policy to reduce wildfire risk, and it is the largest metropolitan area to date that has adopted such a policy. So we were successful in this way, and we did it through these basic 4 communication strategies. Again, identifying who it is we were talking to very specifically, what it is we were trying to say to them, how they needed to hear it, and then who needed to be our messenger. And in this, we are very, again, strategic early on and therefore effective. Always first and foremost, who are you talking to? Who can be the one person to make it happen? Because often it comes down to 3 or 4 individuals represent the decision-making body for the entire policy change that you're looking for. What are you saying? This can be greatly helped by using a messaging box. If you've ever done this before, it's easy to Google this. And there's some guiding points in figuring out what is that key message and how do you distill it down to 1 to 2 sentences by identifying the problem, the so what, or who cares about this, figuring out what the solution is, and then what's the long-term benefit. And this really drives it home for the audience that you're talking to. What is their long-term investment and what are they getting out of it? So that's a message box technique. I won't go into details about this, but I'm happy to talk about it during the Q&A, or again, just Google this and you can find this as a tool online. The do's and don'ts of message boxing or any sort of message delivery: don't use jargon, don't use a lot of numbers and statistics, and don't use a lot of text in any sort of presentation or visual support. What's the yes? Repeat, repeat, repeat. People need to be told 3 times what it is that you're saying in order for them to actually retain that information. Think back to the goldfish image. That's what you're dealing with. You have to repeat, repeat, repeat your message over and over. So go back to that policy or decision maker multiple times, check in and make sure that they've heard you. How do they need to hear it? Well, we know visuals matter. You can talk to people as I am in this presentation, but what's really conveying it are the slides I'm showing. It's the visuals that support it. In fact, 65% of people are more likely to remember information if a visual accompanies it. Think about this very effective, very, very simple advertisement that World Wildlife Fund came out trying to convince people that we needed to save sharks in the ocean. Very simple, very easy. and that it also conveys and delivers the idea that simple is better. This is understood and identified by many marketers as one of the most successful advertisements ever to date, because it is so simple and it delivers such an easy, consumable message. Who needs to say it? Who is your messenger? There's a decision maker that you're trying to influence, but beyond that is the direct influencer, or whoever his honest, trusting partner might be, or whoever his advisor might be. And then there's the indirect influencer. So who can therefore influence the direct influencer, who by then can connect with the decision maker. So there's all these circles and these peripheral concentric circles that you need to think about with the audience in mind, and who it is that you need to get to in order to deliver that message. And therefore that helps you inform that strategy of who you need to pick to be your messenger. Again, sometimes it's you, very often it's not. And then there's always these 3 communication budgets to consider with anything, whether it's a presentation, a report, or some other interactive communications, social media outlet. Is the time, how much time do you have? I've got 22 minutes I've been talking. I think that's about enough. We'll wrap it up here real soon. The complexity of what you're saying, keep it pretty simple depending on the audience. If you're talking to an academic peer, obviously you can get more technical, but the complexity and the information you're sharing really depends, again, on your audience, knowing that they need to be told something 3 times in order to retain it, and that you've got their attention for about 9 or 8 seconds. And then give them something hopeful to end on. They need to know that it's not all doom and gloom, which a lot of research, let's face it, tends to be in terms of facing the statistics and the facts of what we're looking at with the real world. But in doing so, always find a solution, always direct towards how that problem can be overcome. Again, with STEM fields comes the strength, the tenacity, the empathy, and the motivation that we as women can provide in unique, creative ways. So I ask all of you, where do you get your STEM from? There's the, the power stance that can really invoke and actually increase hormonal changes in you to feel that you have the confidence to deliver your message. Sometimes it's the nurturing support of a spouse or a loved one, a sister, a brother, another girlfriend. Wherever you find that inner strength, I encourage you to tap into it and pull from it, because your science matters, your voice matters, and decision makers need to hear it. Because there is no force equal to a woman determined to rise. This is very, very important. So I encourage, again, all of you to tap into that inner STEM to know that your voice is important and it needs to be heard. And with that, I will leave my contact information up there for a moment, and then we have at least 25, 30 minutes or so, if not more, Rojah, to take questions or any other comments. I would love to speak to this group and hear more.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kimiko, for such a stimulating and extremely relevant talk on the importance of effective communication for policymakers, and really tailoring research according to the audiences that it's being targeted at. It was very inspiring to learn about your personal journey as a female researcher and an Asian American minority in the US, as well as the STEM field. I'm sure that everyone here has had significant takeaways from today's seminar, and we are grateful to scientists like yourself to pave the way and act as role models for future scientists and researchers. Now, without any further ado, we should dive right into the questions brought up by the attendees. So, our first question is, what are the hindrances stopping scientists from directly being the point of contact that is trusted by the public? Why are public elected officials held in higher regard when public knows that they don't have the information or solutions directly?
Okay, Rojah, I am going to need you to say those one more time. And it seemed like there was a couple of questions in that, so I want to make sure I answer them. But let's break it apart here. What was the first one?
So it's a 2-part question. The first is, what are the hindrances stopping scientists from being the direct point of contact that the public trusts?
So that is a fantastic question. And I think globally, unfortunately, this has really been coming out for decades now, is there is an increasing distrust in science. It has certainly become more prevalent in recent years, but even prior to that, really, dating 1950s onwards, there's just been a cultural hesitancy to embrace science in general. And this is, of course, just increased, particularly in recent years as well. So I think there's that one is a social cultural paradigm and reluctance to embrace science as an authoritative point of not just research, but of direction, of guidance. It can kind of be a peripheral, but it's been overcome by, I think, some pretty strong social, more pervasive opinions that are not necessarily scientific based. So there's that piece. And then the second one reason I believe is that we as scientists and researchers are very poor communicators. We generally are, just because it's not something we're taught. We are taught to do research really, really well. We are taught scientific methods. We are taught how to do analysis. We are taught quantitative and qualitative descriptives. We know everything there is to know about science and research. And at no point in my academic training, again, was I ever taught about how to communicate or speak about what I was doing. I was taught how to write about it in a peer-reviewed publication. And I have since learned now in my career that there is a very, very small portion of the audience I am trying to reach that actually reads peer-reviewed publications. They want to read a newspaper article, an op-ed, a Twitter feed, 250 characters or less, please. They don't have time to read the jargon that academic language provides. And so I think if I could encourage any students right now to do anything to advance their career, if they're looking to get outside academia, it would be to take a communications course or a PR course. Learn how to speak about what it is you're doing, because if not, you're not going to learn until you get on the job. And so I think that's one significant oversight in academia that has never been told to us, is actually the importance of communications, particularly now in that everybody wants to use social media or is much more comfortable with email exchange rather than kind of personal engagement or interaction. And so I think without that, we will continue to lose credibility with communications and being that point of contact. And so what was the second question, Rojah?
The second question was, why are public elected officials held in higher regard when public knows that they don't have the information or solutions directly?
Yeah, such good questions. I wish I was a psychologist, because I think what I'm talking, these are, if I knew the answer to some of this, I think we could solve the world in so many unique ways. Politicians are professional communicators. They're the opposite of what we are, right? Like they know exactly how to tailor their message to who it is they're talking to. They will feed a reporter exactly what that reporter wants to hear, or tell a homeowner or a neighbor or a resident, a constituent, exactly what that person needs to be told in order to be elected. Unlike us, they have been taking communications course and media training from the moment they decided to be a politician. So they have their strengths on the other end of the spectrum. And in doing so, they pervade a confidence in understanding and having the solutions, because they are required to. If they don't have a solution, they won't get reelected. So whether they have one or not, they're going to tell you they have one. So I think, you're dealing with very different frameworks and positioning in terms of how they understand, what it is their role is in society. And scientists, they have some answers, but they're not always good at sharing it. Politicians often have the answers and are happy to share it. They might not be the right answers. So, I don't know if that gets to the answer, but that is certainly my take on that question.
Okay, thank you for elaborating so eloquently on the issue and importance of communication, especially with the changing nature of how information is provided to the wider public, especially with the rise of social media. So our next question is, how do you feel motivated when your voice is continuously being unheard? At some point, you also start to feel that.
Oh, yeah, it is true. It can become very disenfranchising. And so, a story I was going to share in the presentation that I think is better for now anyways is, a few months ago, I was asked to give a presentation to a group of regional fire chiefs up in an area north of us. And so I walked into the room, and it was a group, there was 100 people in there, and every single person sitting down was a man. Every single person was. And I got excited at one point because a woman came in and I thought, oh, great, at least there's one other woman in this room. And no, she was actually working with the hotel organizers to make sure that my computer was set up. And then she left. So I was speaking to this group of men, and I took a moment, I went into the bathroom knowing I was going to have the bathroom to myself. I'm the only woman. And I did my inner mantra, whatever it is that I need to gain my strength, my stem, my tenacity, my determination and motivation to carry that presentation through. And I walked back into that room with the full confidence that it didn't matter if I was speaking to men or women, that audience was there to listen to what I had to say. And it was incredibly rewarding. And at the end of it, I got great compliments. I got really insightful questions. They did not at all discriminate or question my level of authority because I was a woman. In fact, they actually took it as an honor to be able to speak with me and to have that opportunity to engage on my area of expertise. And so I think it's those little nuggets, those little experiences of positive engagement where your voice is heard that overcome those other experiences where you feel like you are being quieted. Because that happens too, make no doubt about it. There are times when I am in policy discussions, particularly with federal leadership out of Washington, D.C., where it is mostly men, and you are going to be that minority voice in many ways, and what you say might not be heard the way you wanted it to be, and it can be disappointing, and again, it can be discouraging. But on the inverse, you will also have opportunities where you have made that true impact that you felt really resonated with the right group of people. And so it's a balance, and you're going to have the good and the bad. So don't dwell in those bad moments, because you will have a good moment. And so you just have to ride with it and persevere. And again, use those STEM tenets that you have the strength and the determination to overcome those points of being disappointed by an audience, or feeling like you haven't been heard, or you were heard incorrectly or taken out of context. Obviously that happens as well, but you will have good moments too. And so stick with those good moments, because in the end, you can make all of the difference that you need in those good moments.
We really appreciate you being so candid with us about your experience, because there is the inevitability that possibly for aspiring change makers present here, that could be an experience in our futures. So moving on, our next question is: scientists who like to communicate are tagged as activists and treated less like all the other scientists. How do you overcome this peer judgment which early career female scientists face all the time?
Yeah, man, you guys are good. These are fantastic questions. These are better than the policymaker questions I get out of DC. So, yeah, I want to be candid. You will be criticized, you will be judged, you will have to work twice as hard because you are a young aspiring female, and that is the nature of being in a STEM related position right now. But do not let that quiet your voice. Do not let that diminish your ability to deliver your message, because again, your research and your work is so important. And sometimes the harshest judgment comes from other women in the field. And I think that's something that's human nature in many ways. But you have to have faith and conviction in what you're doing, I believe. And that's where the passion comes in. And you have to know that what you're doing is right. And if your passion isn't there, then I don't want to discourage you out of what you're doing, but without that, your momentum to continue to do the work will be harder. And so sometimes that's where I say it's beneficial to lean onto those activities, those vices, those distractions outside your career to help guide you, and to see if you're on point still, to see if what you're saying, am I normal? Am I being ridiculous here? And sometimes it takes a mother, a sister, a friend, your daughter to be like, no, like this is like, keep fighting. You have to keep fighting. So I think to anticipate moving forward in the STEM field and not receive criticism, to not receive judgment, is not right. You will get that, but you'll get that in any field you pursue if you are trying to succeed as a woman. So embrace it as part of your challenge to overcome it. Understand where it's coming from, because sometimes it's a right constructive criticism. Sometimes they're telling you something that can really benefit you. Sometimes it's not on point and you can disregard it. Take those ones as they come and don't take it personally. Know that you are better than that you are an educated woman, and that you are trying to do great things with your work, and that you have to be stronger than that opposition in that way. And sometimes that takes stepping back for a moment and going into your non-career related work and doing what you need to do to feel rejuvenated again. Read a book, listen to music, play with it, go out with a girlfriend, do whatever you need to do, go for a walk, and find that psychological rejuvenation to be able to come back to your job and do it well again. And so I don't know if I got to your question in that, but those are some of the guiding principles I always fall back on when I find myself in that situation.
These are definitely words of wisdom, and we should take judgments as a challenge to make our voices heard even louder, because I believe the work that we're focusing on here should outshine any kind of snide comments that may come our way. So the next question is that scientific miscommunication is an inevitable part of science communication, especially with sensitive topics or issues like climate change, where public and political industrial interests may differ drastically. Miscommunication can be intentional even. Have you ever faced such a situation, and how did you deal with it?
Absolutely. Yeah, the misinformation, disinformation campaign is very real. And it's certainly a challenge globally at this point. Again, I would really say it comes back to who it is I'm talking to and how it is they need to hear my message. In a place like I live in Montana, you don't talk so much about the word climate change. That doesn't resonate well with people. They associate it with liberal elitist thinking, where you guys are a bunch of hippies and you're worried about us polluting the world. And while that may be true, if I'm trying to talk to that person, I'm not going to use the word climate change then. I'll talk about how, if it's a rancher, how has, the increasing drought affected your crop harvest and your ability to sustain your livelihood. You talk about the same process and you pick your words very deliberately in order for them to actually know what you're saying without picking those kind of flashpoint vocabulary and terminology that can trigger an immediate controversial debate. So again, pick and choose those words based on who you're talking to. So something like climate change, in our case, a Republican decision maker, that's not a word I'm going to use. I will say increasing risks brought on by wildfire. I don't even need to use the word climate change. So there's ways of kind of very diplomatically and tactfully rewording your messaging based on that person you're talking to. And also, in part of that, I think, is being very strategic and deliberate about who you are working with. I don't necessarily need to work with somebody who doesn't believe that wildfires are happening. They are happening. It's happening, and people are suffering and dying from it, and we see it all the time. And if that person doesn't believe it, honestly, I'm not going to waste my time with him. He's not the person I need to convince then. There's going to be somebody he reports to. He will have a colleague in a different office that I can speak to who does believe it or is at least more receptive to it. So be very strategic about who it is you're talking to and gain, do that cost benefit analysis. Is this person going to be persuaded by what I have to say? Because if he's not, then maybe I need to spend my time on somebody else who is. And that's really kind of how you have to think through that. Do your homework, figure out who it is these people are, those core decision makers, and see what are their tendencies, what are their preferences, how can you relate to them, how can you speak to them in a way that they'll understand what you're saying and truly feel the impact in a way that you want them to feel it. And so I think it's being very intentional early on about this to know where is your best investment in your time and in your energy.
Definitely, thank you. I think this answer only further builds on the significance of effective communication and the different strategies or vocabulary we can engage to best convey our concerns and scientific findings. So, Muhammad Ibrahim was saying, I followed the IPCC Instagram page a while ago with intention of sharing jarring images and facts from the source, and I was greatly disappointed. What are the worst offenses you've seen with science communicators in recent times?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You know, I've been taught early on the power of visuals. My mother is a graphic designer. She instilled in me from a very early age that you need to use visuals to support your argument when it's an option. So the IPCC report that Mohammed referenced, I totally agree. It's lacking that visual connectivity in a really personal way. How does this impact me as a reader? It doesn't. This is happening in the coastal reefs. I don't care kind of thing. Instead, make it feel personal. What's the story in those impacted coral reefs? How does it affect that person? And very often, it's a narrative accompanied by a strong picture or a visual. And I know it really simplifies and it reduces scientific work into storytelling. And that is something we as researchers struggle with, right? Like we like complexity. We don't want to lose the detail and the nuance of everything we put so much of our time into. You need to be able to quantify with variables and say why you use that variable and why that metric matters. And I can tell you right now, decision makers don't really care about that so much. They want the how does this matter? Why do I care? And they will care if you can tell them in a story. So the IPCC report is standard institutional government report. It shares the statistics, it shares the facts, it lacks the story. It lacks that ability to really connect with broad audiences around the world that are feeling climate change on a day-to-day basis, may not know it, but in lacking some of those stories, it really lacks that connectivity on a very one-on-one level. And so what we at Headwaters Economics do is employ a graphics team very closely, as well as a communications team, to help us think through all of these strategies in a way that I'm not talking just about wildfire. I'm talking about the homeowner whose house burned down because a wildfire came through and they were unprepared. So therefore, how can you start conveying that story in a way that really resonates with the decision maker who can make that not happen again? So that's how we have learned to really customize our science in a way that does bring the facts and the science, but weaves it very closely with graphics, with a story, with a narrative, with a personal experience to bring it home and make it seem like that decision maker has been personally impacted as well.
Thank you for shedding light on the importance of utilizing visual mediums when it comes to engaging audiences and conveying scientific findings. So our next question is, are there any challenges staying non-partisan while working on issues like climate change?
Yes. It is fraught with nonpartisan challenges. You know, I work though with Wildfire, which is a subcomponent of this larger umbrella of climate change. Yes, it's all within climate change, but I work very explicitly with one component of it in Wildfire. And in the Western United States, it's ubiquitous. So pretty much everybody knows it's happening because it's such a palatable experience at this time. The smoke is in the air, homes are burning, we see the fires happening. It's very real. And in that sense, it's nonpartisan because of its material manifestation. It's in front of us. You can't avoid it. My challenge, therefore, is to try and talk about solutions in a very objective, research, nonpartisan way. There are opportunities to address this risk that meet and acquiesce to the concerns of both Republicans and Democrats. So trying to find that middle ground, trying to pull on diplomacy to make that happen is part of my role. And again, that's where I would encourage all of you as women in STEM research. This is a strength that you are inherently born with because you are all doing multiple roles. Your daughters, your sisters, your mothers, I go home and I'm going to have to make dinner for my family and put my child to bed. and listen to my husband tell his stories. As much as, you know, I get to share those experiences, my day doesn't end when I leave the office. And because you have all of these multiple roles, you are intrinsically in this unique position to adapt your role based off of who you're talking to at any given moment. And that's the same thing with scientific communications. Who are you talking to? Is it a male Republican out of, you know, the state of Texas, or is it going to be a female progressive Democrat out of California? That's a different message for both of those people. And I need to know what that is. So I have to be strategic early on in figuring it out and being able to pull on it in different ways. But certainly there's lots of bipartisan challenges, but there is a common medium vehicle and catalyst for policy change if you can find out what that is. What is that common threat, and what therefore is a appropriate common solution for both sides?
In a world where even realities like climate change are a highly politicized and contentious debate, thank you for reminding us that maintaining a neutral stance can work out in our favor. So our next question is from Sanya. She says, in a third world country where many other policy issues are viewed as being much more immediate and important, it's extremely difficult to draw serious attention to matters of environmental policy. How can we communicate the importance of environmental problems without appearing as if we are diminishing others?
Oh, Sonia, that is a very, very valid question. And it's something I only know tangentially in my experience doing my dissertation work in Ladakh. And it was one of the first takeaways I had, honestly, in that I was talking about the immediacy of climate change when in fact the communities I was dealing with were talking about an invading front from China. You know, that's where their concern was. They didn't want to talk about melting glaciers because that was still years or decades away. They needed to talk about the fact that they had no children working the farms because all the children moved to Delhi to work instead. Those were much more immediate for them. And it was a very rough realization coming from my perspective and understanding that hierarchy of needs and research policy. So what you're saying is certainly valid, and I again can relate to it through my dissertation. How do you bring attention to that? You know, is tough in your situation, and I don't want to sound patronizing because I'm coming at it from an American perspective, and honestly, what would I know what it's like in your position? So what I say, please don't take it, you know, too much or too personal, because I cannot relate in the way that you are all experiencing in Pakistan. But what I would say is that the need to think about intergenerational health and what that looks like for those coming behind us is not going to be something that's mentioned by the people in front of us. It's going to be you in your role, and your peers are the ones that are going to have to bring attention to that intergenerational sustainability and trying to bring attention to it in a way that doesn't discriminate against other immediate priorities is really challenging. And you're going to have to do it in a way that tries to tie it in and again, find that common thread. Well, yes, that is true, but you understand too that if we don't address some of these needs right now, we won't have healthy drinking water in the next 10 years, which therefore does sacrifice some of our very immediate needs that we have here. Try and find that common thread that really ties it all together. Sometimes it's an economic argument. That's something I found. Well, but by investing $1 right now, you will save $4 in the long term in mitigation. You know, some of those arguments can be really helpful when you bring it down to the cost, because that's something policymakers think about all the time. Or what would be the potential implications if they don't act now? You know, if you don't do this right now, we are looking at costs in the hundreds of billions of dollars for rehabilitation and recovery efforts. Is that something you really want to pass on to us? Is that something that your administration wants to take on? Trying to make those kind of arguments from a fiscal perspective can sometimes be much more effective than on a humanitarian level. Because I can tell you right now, policymakers on a humanitarian level, they will tell you what they need to hear. But when it comes down to it, what they are interested in is what is this going to mean for the bottom line and how are we going to be impacted with our budget? So trying to kind of tease out those arguments can also be really helpful. That's, again, my perspective. coming from Montana and dealing with the policymakers I am addressing right now. It's not necessarily going to be the same method that you can apply in Pakistan.
It is indeed a very thought-provoking perspective, connecting climate change to economic devastation and how that would impact the communities, and how, local politicians could take stances in that sense to really speak up for their communities. Sorry. So our last question is, on behalf of scientists looking to leave research and academia behind, how do you deal with the transition of leaving behind lab work, and do you miss it at all?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the first things that's helpful is to take a moment to think about what you want in your life. Sit back and think about, if you could project 5 years out, 10 years out, what is it that you what would be that vision for you? Are you thinking you want to ultimately get married, have children, or no, that's not what is in line for you? You would rather be on your own. You want to keep doing, a path in this direction where career is your primary objective, and just thinking through all of those various trajectories, those scenarios that you are in your life, and where you want to envision yourself in 5 to 10 years can be very, very important, because I think knowing that early on can help you direct yourself in the right path. And so when you step out of academia, understand that re-entry is going to be really difficult, if possible at all. Once you leave academia, going back to it is going to be very, very hard. So be very thoughtful about being determined and convinced that that is the right step for you. Universities are not likely to embrace you if you've left and gone into the private world and then come back to want to teach. You need to make that call early on and just be very careful and sure that that's the right decision for you. But if you do go in that direction, you have a lot of different opportunities that academia doesn't provide you. You'll have a little bit more flexibility possibly with your work-life balance. You might have that same pressure to publish papers. You'll have a little bit more adaptability and malleability on your end to really make it what you want, depending on which field you go into. Say you want to travel a whole bunch, then you can apply to an international NGO. Say, you do decide you want to have children, you're going to need to have something that balances that work life, probably better than other jobs are going to allow in the private sector or the academic circle. So I think just being very clear what that transition looks like and embracing those challenges and knowing it will probably be ups and downs early on, but that vision is in front of you of where you had wanted to be in 5 to 10 years. And if you kind of keep that as your goalpost, knowing that that's ultimately where you see yourself, then, I think that's one of the strongest mental practices I can encourage anybody to do, is to just think through that. And it is all about being, you are researchers. You're born with an innate ability to be strategic because you're scientists. So tap into that and use that as your benefit to really think very carefully about every decision you're making, whether it's communications or non-communications, in both life and work. And that is a strength in your asset. And so utilize it.
Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Kimiko, for such a stimulating seminar. We are all extremely grateful to you for taking out time for us and giving us such a thoughtful insight and answering all the questions that have been brought out. We certainly hope that everyone who's attended the session goes back with new knowledge and an understanding of the importance of effective communication, and how that can really be utilized to properly convey scientific findings. I guess we'll be wrapping up the session now.
Yes, thank you, Rojah. Thank you, Dr. Barrett. It wasn't just an informative session, it was extremely useful. And like Rojah just mentioned, I'm sure every single person who attended had something that they can eventually apply in their life. So it was amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you again for you. I know you were already up, but it was still super early morning for you. Thank you.
Thank you all for staying up over there. I appreciate you hearing me out and spending your evening, your night with me.
Thank you. It was lovely. Yes, we are losing people now. Thank you so much. We will just send you a follow-up email. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Bye-bye.